case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that she grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father Thomas managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers, earned funds. The man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kimberly was a little girl, her parents divorced. The child was left to live with her mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man, decided to move to Florida, she faced a choice to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she didn't want to move, the young lady decided to live with her father. Kimberly was very close to her father and enjoyed living with him. As she grew up, she became a well-behaved, sociable child and eventually a stunning young woman with a radiant smile that always lifted her spirits. She had a great sense of humor and a positive attitude. Kimberly was raised in a sheltered environment, surrounded by love and care, which protected her from the harsh realities of life. As a result, she only saw the good in people and was largely unaware of the darker aspects of life. Unfortunately, her open and kind nature would eventually lead to many sorrows. In 1994, Kimberly enrolled at the College of Staten Island. Shortly after, she told her father that she felt ready to live on her own. Although Mr. Kimberly was worried about her decision, he respected her independence and decided not to oppose it. He promised himself that he would do his best to ensure her safety and well-being in her new living arrangements. Kimberly bought a nice apartment for his daughter, located in a wealthy area of the city, and installed an alarm system to ensure her safety. He also purchased a parking space in the garage across the street so she wouldn't have to park far away. To stay in touch, he provided her with a cell phone and a pager. Kimberly did everything in his power to ensure his daughter's well-being. His concerns for her safety were well-founded, given his wealth and her limited life experience. Kimberly was a diligent student who also worked part-time as an accountant at a reputable firm. She had declined her father's offer to join the family business, opting instead to forge her own path. Kimberly led a typical student life, attending parties and socializing with friends. She declined her father's offers to return home, wanting to maintain independence. This led to an unexpected situation when she let friend Liz Pace and her family stay while their apartment was being renovated in early 1995. Kimberly, with a kind heart, invited young people to her lodging. They spent days having fun together. One day, Kimberly and a friend attended a party, getting ready and dressing up. After a fun night of dancing, Kimberly drove them home but didn't go up, citing unfinished business. They hugged goodbye, unaware they'd never see each other again. After visiting the police, Mr. Kimberly's father, went to the parking lot next to her house, only to find that her car was missing from the garage. As he looked around, he spotted a shiny object on the floor near the wall, a small gold earring. He recalled giving his daughter similar earrings and, just in case, picked it up. However, Kimberly was nowhere to be found in the apartment. Instead, he met her guests, including a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their 2-year-old child. Although Kimberly was aware of Kimberly's decision, he didn't agree with it. The tenants were worried about the hostess' absence and Joshua offered to help find her. He said he was looking for Kimberly and would assist later. Kimberly returned to the police station, explaining that his daughter had been in an accident, but the officers remained unconvinced. Kimberly decided to speak with Liz Pace, the last person to see Kimberly, and showed her the jewelry he had found. Liz Pace confirmed that she had seen Kimberly wearing those earrings on the night she disappeared. Kimberly then visited the places his daughter frequently went to, talking to many people, but didn't gather any significant information. Joshua suggested searching not only for Kimberly but also for her distinctive car. Kimberly went to the police station for the 3rd time, insisting that he wouldn't leave until they began a search. A detective eventually responded to his appeal, agreeing to take on the investigation despite the usual protocol. To better understand the events surrounding Kimberly Antinoko's, investigators started by reconstructing her activities on February 28th. Kimberly began the day by attending college, followed by a few hours of work. After work, she returned home and had dinner with friends before heading out to a party with a friend named Liz Pace. The evening concluded with their return home around 4 a.m. Following her return, Kimberly went to the parking lot for reasons that remain unclear. Both her apartment and garage were thoroughly searched, but no signs of struggle or foreign fingerprints were found. This lack of evidence suggested either a meticulous cleanup or that any potential intruder may have worn gloves. The most puzzling aspect was the disappearance of Kimberly and her car without any trace, except for a single earring that was found. An analysis of Kimberly's bank account revealed that her last transaction occurred the evening before she vanished, ruling out the possibility that she had run away from home. Based on the evidence, detectives hypothesized that Kimberly was likely kidnapped. The investigation expanded to include additional police officers. Due to the lack of concrete leads, law enforcement considered information from a psychic. Witness interviews began with Liz Pace and Joshua. They revealed 65 calls were made from Kimberly's landline on March 1st. Joshua explained he made these calls to locate Kimberly, who was like a little sister to him. Liz Pace's testimony helped determine Kimberly's clothing in a portrait was created, highlighting her distinctive tattoos, including a scorpion and infinity sign. Meanwhile, a search for the missing car was underway with checks at scrap metal collection points and other locations where the vehicle might be found. Unfortunately, no positive results were obtained. A check of Kimberly's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police advised Kimberly to pay attention to any letters or phone calls he received, as they might be from Kimberly's kidnappers demanding a ransom. The Kimberly family remained in a state of uncertainty until March 4th. At approximately 2 a.m., emergency services responded to a reported fire at a large, abandoned house located at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Multiple fire crews battled the blaze until it was finally extinguished. Upon investigation, a charred body was discovered in the basement of the building. Further analysis by forensic experts revealed the deceased was a woman between 20 to 25 years old, with remnants of long, black hair still intact. There were also signs of tape and evidence that her legs had been bound, with her hands tied behind her back. The most disturbing aspect, however, was that she was alive at the time of the fire, as indicated by the presence of smoke in her lungs. Detectives initially suspected that the body might belong to Kimberly, a missing person. To confirm the identity, dental records were required. Meanwhile, an inspection of the ashes and the air revealed the scent of gasoline, strongly suggesting that the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence of a serious crime. Despite the absence of other evidence, the charred body remained, and upon closer examination, specialists found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records from the dental clinic supported the investigation suspicions, leading to the discovery of Kimberly Antinoki's body. As more details emerged, an eyewitness came forward who often walked his dog in the area. The dog had been acting strangely in the days prior to the fire, appearing nervous and barking at the house for no apparent reason. It wasn't until after the fire and the discovery of the body that the cause of the dog's behavior became clear. She had attempted to escape and called for help, but her cries went unheard by humans. However, the dog's acute hearing allowed it to detect the sounds coming from the basement, explaining its unusual behavior. When questioned by officers, the homeowner revealed that he had visited the building multiple times in recent days. He was trying to sell the house and would regularly check on its condition, collect mail, and pick up receipts. However, he only inspected the house from the outside and never went into the basement. The homeowner claimed he never heard any suspicious noises, and if he had, he would have investigated. Investigators decided to re-question Joshua, as they had some reservations about him. They also found it strangely coincidental that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua mentioned a person he hadn't been able to contact the day Kimberly went missing, a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had previously dated Kimberly. The detectives looked into this new information and discovered that the Russian had moved to the US with his parents at a young age. As he grew older, he became involved with a gang and had a history of breaking the law. This led to the identification of the first suspect, who was soon taken into custody. During interrogation, Psycho was informed of his former lover's death, but his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man not only denied involvement in the crime, but he also showed genuine emotional distress. Investigators took him to the crime scene to observe his behavior, and it became clear to everyone that they had the wrong person in custody. Later, his alibi was confirmed, leaving the investigation at a standstill once again. The victim's family sought the psychic's help again. This time, she claimed to have seen 4 people involved in the crime. According to her, the kidnappers had initially intended to establish communication, but failed. The kidnapping didn't seem to have been planned with a tragic outcome. The psychic concluded that new information would emerge soon. A couple of days later, Mr. Kimberly, hoping to gather some leads, announced a $10,000 reward for information that could help catch the perpetrator. Mr. Kimberly couldn't shake off the psychic's words. He pondered the psychics about the kidnappers wanting to make contact. What could that mean, and what had prevented them from doing so? Upon returning home, he sat at the table and stared at his phone for a while. He suddenly recalled a minor detail from the day Kimberly went missing. He had listened to all the answering machine recordings as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there were no messages except for 2 blank ones with complete silence. He initially thought it was a technical issue or a problem with the connection, but it later became clear that this was not the case. 5 days after her body was found, the police located her car in a quiet area of town, not far from where her body was discovered. The investigators were hoping to find fingerprints in the car, but it had been thoroughly cleaned. The only evidence they found was her hair and a second earring in the passenger compartment. Although it seemed like a breakthrough, it didn't lead anywhere. Kimberly, her father, was linked to a local mob hit due to his wealth and success. However, detectives found no evidence to support the rumors. Kimberly, grieving the loss of his daughter, denied any involvement and was found to conduct his business openly and honestly. In July 1995, a burglary suspect was arrested at a New York City residence. Surprisingly, he shared information about the Kimberly case. The suspect claimed an acquaintance told him that his friends had kidnapped and killed she by burning her. Upon hearing the unidentified man's name, the officers pieced together the crime. The man in question was Joshua Torres, Kimberly's roommate who had participated in the search for her. Detectives took a closer look at the young man, calling him in for further questioning. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, a lengthy conversation revealed a potentially incriminating statement. He mentioned that if he were the kidnapper, he would have fed the victim Kimberly. This statement raised suspicions since there had been no public mention of the victim's hunger, thirst, or cold, and not even her father was aware of these details. To strengthen their case, investigators examined the suspect's past, finding a criminal record and a pattern of obsessive behavior. He was jobless and financially dependent on his roommate, caring for her child, which gave him unmonitored time to plan the crime. Knowing Kimberly's daily routine allowed him to abduct her and hide her in a vacant house. It was unclear why no ransom demands were made. Analyzing the suspect's calls revealed he lied about contacting Kimberly's acquaintances. The dialed numbers belonged to random individuals with no connection to Kimberly. Suspicious messages on his pager further implicated the suspect, Joshua. He had long been a suspect in the eyes of detectives, and they finally gathered enough evidence to arrest him. During the interrogation, they informed him that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend was no longer considered a suspect. Pressed for more information, Torres revealed that he suspected his friends of being responsible for her murder. Torres claimed that he thought his friends only intended to kidnap Kimberly for ransom and then release her unharmed. He admitted to being an accessory to the kidnapping but maintained that he did not think his friends would resort to violence. According to Torres, the plan was to demand a ransom and then let Kimberly go. But things did not go as planned. The kidnappers became frustrated when their ransom demands were met with silence from Mr. Kimberly. Unbeknownst to them, their calls had been answered by Kimberly's father and a ransom message had even been recorded. However, due to a technical issue, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers, feeling ignored and angered by the lack of response, decided to wait and see how events would unfold. It turns out the group feared public attention, and the psychics claimed that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was published and broadcast on TV, creating a cycle of events. Joshua was released on bail after speaking with the police, but then disappeared. Around the same time, Jose was shot while walking with his wife. Jose's wife later told investigators that her husband didn't trust Joshua and had been gathering evidence against him. She claimed Jose felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly but not about the house fire. He wanted to confess to the police, just as he had to her. The pager messages and suspect statements helped investigators piece together the kidnapping and crime details. 4 men were involved: Joshua, Julio Negrin, Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett, also known as Jay. Notably, Julio had previously dated Kimberly and proposed, but she rejected him. The group was united by friendship and a shared criminal past. However, their actions were far surpassed by the horrific treatment of she at the hands of the guys. Nicholas had recently been released on bail, thanks to his mother's intervention, and had received a lenient fine for a crime that could have resulted in a prison sentence of over a year. Joshua had a history of serious offenses, including child abduction, violence against a minor, and illegal possession of weapons, despite his young age. Nevertheless, he too had received an inappropriately light sentence for his crimes. It was evident that Joshua was the ringleader responsible for coordinating the groups after Kimberly left the party. The men seized her in the parking lot, having apparently been stalking her and waiting for the ideal moment to strike when she was alone. A gun was used to intimidate Kimberly. When she resisted, the perpetrators tied her hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. They then put her in the trunk of a car and drove her to an abandoned house, where she was taken to the basement and tied to a chair. To prevent her from making noise, they removed her shoes. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed them money and that she would be released once he paid the debt. Julio was tasked with caring for Kimberly, bringing her food and water twice a day and keeping her warm. However, fearing the consequences, Julio abandoned the house, leaving Kimberly without food, water, or warmth for 3 days. Once Julio left, the kidnappers informed Joshua, who made an audio recording demanding a ransom of $775,000. Then, the kidnapper called Kimberly's father, leaving 2 empty messages. The kidnappers waited for a response, genuinely confused as to why Kimberly's father didn't contact them. Meanwhile, Kimberly, left unattended, suffered from dehydration, passing out multiple times, yet continued to fight for her life. The kidnappers grew angry and fearful of being caught due to the lack of ransom payment, so they decided to release Kimberly. Upon entering the basement, they found her unconscious and assumed she was dead. To eliminate evidence in the hostage, they planned to get rid of her. During the investigation, officers learned from Liz Pace that Joshua used his roommate as an alibi, directing his accomplices while staying at home with his child. Liz Pace initially claimed she was unaware of Joshua's involvement in Kimberly's kidnapping. However, at the trial, she testified against him. She stated that after being interrogated, Joshua approached her and confessed to all his crimes. However, he then turned violent, physically assaulting her, silencing her, and issuing death threats before fleeing. Some time later, Joshua was apprehended by law enforcement. In an effort to further the investigation, the authorities decided to bring the former friends together, informing them that Joshua had denied any involvement in the massacre. Upon learning of Joshua's denial, Julio chose to cooperate with the investigation, revealing crucial information. This cooperation played a pivotal role in securing Torres' conviction for Kimberly's murder. Ultimately, the trio faced charges of murder, arson, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. During the trial, evidence emerged that Joshua had made repeated attempts to deceive investigators and evade punishment. After deliberating for approximately 10 hours, the jury reached a verdict. Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence as the others. Julio Negrin was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. Tomas Kimberly, the victim's family member, was satisfied with the court's verdict and did not want the perpetrators to receive the death penalty. In his opinion, the death penalty would have been too lenient a punishment. Nicholas Brett was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison and died of AIDS after serving 2 years. Julio Negrin was released after serving his 2-year sentence. Joshua will not be eligible for release until 2053 at the earliest. Tragically, sadly, Kimberly's father, Kimberly, passed away from cancer in 2005. His family believes that the stress and grief caused by his daughter's death contributed to his illness. The life of Kimberly Antonakis, a beautiful young girl, was cut short in a shocking and devastating manner. As you begin to explore the Leslie Palacio case, it is impossible not to feel bewildered and disappointed that justice has not yet been served. The killer remains at large, even though the police have all the evidence and his identity is known to them. Today's story underscores the difficulty of investigating crimes when suspects find themselves outside the jurisdiction and victims can only hope that the perpetrators will be found and brought to justice. The morning of the 29th brought anxiety to the home of Valyriia Palacio, mother of 5 lovely daughters. Her eldest daughter Kayla came down to the kitchen and reported that the bed in Leslie's room was untouched. Her belongings were gone, and she clearly hadn't spent the night at home. One of the sisters joked that it must have been a pretty fun night at the club, and Leslie had probably stayed the night at Eric's. In fact, everyone became alarmed since Leslie had never done this before. Over breakfast, Kayla kept glancing at her phone, expecting a waking Leslie to be about to text. Time passed, but still no word from Leslie. By noon, it stopped seeming normal. By late afternoon, Valyriia decided to go to Eric's house on her own and find out where her daughter had disappeared to. When the Palacio family members drove up to the house, they saw Eric's mother and his sister actively removing pieces of furniture and miscellaneous items from the house. Obviously, taking furniture out of the house is quite normal, but the situation itself and Mrs. Ibarra's crying face caused a very strange feeling for Valyriia. Something was not right here. When asked where Leslie was and why Eric's phone was unavailable, Eric's mother and sister pretended that they didn't even know that the couple had spent the evening together. Valyriia once again clarified whether Leslie had slept over at their house that night, because she knew from her daughter's messages that she was going to Eric's house. After receiving a negative response, Leslie's family realized the seriousness of what was happening. Fears became reality, and the family immediately took action. The older sister, realizing that Leslie could not have disappeared so easily, began calling local hospitals and searching the internet for reports of accidents in the last 24 hours. However, the search was unsuccessful, as were attempts to contact Eric. He had either turned off his phone or the phone with deed, as Kayla couldn't even hear the voicemail. Valyriia had no choice but to call the police. The next day, August 30th, Leslie was officially reported missing. The move was the first in an intense fight for justice. Leslie Palacio was born on May 5, 1998 in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Her short but full life was full of love and caring for her family. Always open and friendly girl became a source of joy in any company, as she valued everyone she met in her life and was reciprocated. Leslie dreamed of connecting her life with medicine. After graduating from high school, she entered the Las Vegas Medical College. In 2020, she was already confidently moving towards her dream of becoming a phlebotomist and worked part-time as a lab technician. Combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills, Leslie proved herself to be a talented student. Her academic achievements were admirable. She was able to easily assimilate new material and always strive to deepen her knowledge. That is why the girl decided to work part-time as a laboratory assistant. Unexpectedly, Leslie realized that she had found her calling and soon became an integral part of the team. Colleagues considered the student not only a responsible and professional lab technician, but also a warm, responsive person. The girl's duties included conducting various analyses and tests. But for Leslie, this work was much more than just a fulfillment of duties. She saw her calling in the ability to make the process of taking tests as comfortable as possible for patients. Her caring and patience created an atmosphere of trust. and even those who were apprehensive about the procedure felt at ease in her presence. When the youngest of the nurses asked if Leslie was afraid of getting her hands pierced all the time, she laughingly replied that she now had a super ability to poke people. The young optimist's vitality was evident in her every action. By all accounts, Leslie had the unique potential to become a sought-after and valuable specialist in the field of medical laboratory diagnostics, and she would have, if not for a dramatic turn of events. Leslie has been used to helping and caring for everyone since childhood. As the second of 5 daughters, she took on the role of mother when Leslie Palacio worked as a hotel cleaner. Leslie recalled her daughter kicking her out of the kitchen when she tried to cook dinner after cleaning more than 15 hotel rooms in a shift. "Get some rest," Leslie gently urged her. Wanting to relieve her mother's burden after work, her daughter took it upon herself to prepare dinners and, in her characteristic easygoing manner, found cooking to be a source of inspiration. From then on, she always made sure her family members were very well fed. And even if she was away and couldn't make the family dinner herself, she always called home to make sure everyone had eaten. For Leslie, family came first, and she easily inspired her sisters with her energy and ideas. For example, even during the pandemic, Leslie didn't let sports disappear by organizing workouts in the backyard of the house. She touted her mother various exercises, and with her sisters, danced daily in front of the mirror to music. Her love of experimenting with hair color and image turned it into a joint business plan with her older sister to open a boutique. The sisters began designing and sewing dresses at home in their own unique style. When the coronavirus pandemic happened and Leslie was laid off due to downsizing, Leslie suggested her mother start her own small cleaning company and assured her that she would definitely help her with the cleanings in her free time from work and school. "Mom will be fine soon. You'll see," she assured Leslie. At a family council, they came up with a name for the company, the Palacio Cleaning Service. At the time Leslie disappeared, her dreams were just beginning to be realized. Their family firm had landed its first contract. But on August 29, 2020, all of the Palacio family's plans and dreams came crashing down. At the end of August 2020, Leslie completed the lab assistant program, and the family firm also received a large order. The girl decided it was time to take a break from the stresses and worries and enjoy an evening of dancing and fun. Especially the restrictions due to the pandemic were gradually being lifted and Las Vegas began to come alive. Unfortunately, none of the friends wanted to keep Leslie company. Although people were beginning to let go of their fears and return to their normal lives, they still felt nervous and anxious at the prospect of being in a closed space with lots of people. Leslie didn't give up hope of convincing someone to have fun, and posted a post on Instagram expressing her desire to spend the evening somewhere. Unexpectedly, she received a message from Eric Rangel Ibarra. Leslie and Eric's parents had been attending the same church for 14 years and occasionally socialized, so the children had known each other since childhood, but had never interacted closely. Leslie knew what Eric liked. The guy texted her, showed her attention, but Leslie never reciprocated. She was polite to him, however. On any other day, Leslie would have declined Eric's desire to keep her company, but not this time. She was eager to dilute her ordinary life with a fun evening. The whole day passed in anticipation and anticipation. And when none of Leslie's friends wanted to keep her company, she accepted Eric's polite and warm offer to reminisce about Las Vegas nightlife. Sharing a night out with Eric seemed like a better choice than going nowhere at all. Expecting a fun adventure, Leslie had no idea what horrible events awaited her, but she probably had a premonition of something, trying to rationalize to herself that there was no cause for concern. Anyway, Leslie agreed with her sister that she would send her regular messages, telling her exactly where she was. She also told Kayla in great detail where she was going and with whom and what places she might end up in. After a while, the older sister received a strange message. "Can you believe Eric is totally not going to drink this evening? We're at a party, but it looks like I'm going to have to party alone." Afterward, the sisters exchanged joking messages on the topic of healthy living. The first place Eric and Leslie went to was the casino at the Longhorn Hotel. Police officers would later see on surveillance footage of the couple getting out of a white Ford F 2:50 owned by Eric at 0:31 a.m. on Ayug 29 and entering the casino, then leaving a short time later at 1:56 a.m. The couple would then leave the casino. Leslie kept in contact with her sister, telling her what was going on. At 4:40 a.m., Leslie sent her sister another strange message. "I need to talk to you about something shitty." Kayla asked what happened and, according to her, a text box popped up as if Leslie had started to reply, but no answer ever came. That text message was the last of the girl's life. The morning of the 29th came. Leslie still hadn't returned home. The more time passed, the more concerned the Palacio family members became. The certainty that Leslie had stayed the night at Eric's house was replaced by confusion, and the family went to a familiar house where they found a strange scene. Mrs. Ibarra and her daughter were taking out furniture, pretending that they had heard for the first time that Leslie and Eric had spent the evening together. In fact, Leslie's family arrived at Eric's house just in time. If they had arrived a few hours later, the investigation would have been significantly delayed. The police found traces of blood in the house, a mess in the bedroom, which suggests that Eric's mother and his sister spent the whole day, strangely enough, not to clean up the traces of the crime, but to pack things down to the pieces of furniture. The family was clearly not going on a picnic, but planning a long-term and thorough absence. Most likely, they had arranged to reunite with Eric and his father, Jose, in Mexico, where the two had traveled in order to escape justice. Upon seeing the Palacio family, Mrs. Ibarra probably realized that the chance to leave was gone, leaving evidence in the house that no one would take the time to clean up. Panicked, mother and daughter began to simply deny knowing about Leslie and Eric's evening together. It was this behavior that led to the suspicion that something irreparable had happened. Fortunately, the Las Vegas police took immediate action and sent out a billing inquiry intending to track Leslie's movements since the previous night. But unfortunately, it takes some time to get that data while the Palacios couldn't sit back and wait. The family started a campaign to spread the word about Leslie's disappearance. People responded and began actively sharing the information on social media. No one expected that there would be so many people who cared. Eric's mom especially didn't expect it. Detectives kept asking more and more questions. And on August 31st, Mrs. Ibarra went to the police station and filed a missing persons report for her husband and son. Mrs. Ibarra told police that her son, Eric, left home late in the evening on August 28th. And when he returned the next morning, he was acting strangely. She saw him walk out the door and never returned. The police noticed a strange circumstance. Not only was Leslie missing, but Eric was also missing, as well as his father. Based on this, an investigation into the triple disappearance began. With the Las Vegas police involved, detectives turned to the residents of the neighborhood with the hope of finding surveillance cameras that recorded something important. Luck smiled. It was discovered that just across the street from Jose Ibarra's home, there were surveillance cameras. In addition to the CCTV footage, police obtained billing data that allowed them to track Leslie's movements in the early morning hours of the 29th. Detectives found that the couple went to the casino and afterward to a grill bar, which they reached around 2:15 a.m. accidentally or not. Leslie's cell phone was left at the bar, and the records show that Leslie left the establishment around 5:50 a.m., which is quite early in the morning. At 6:05 a.m., neighborhood cameras captured Eric's car pulling up to the family home. The nature of his assistance to Leslie in getting out of the car and on the way to the house clearly indicated that the girl was heavily intoxicated. At 7:25 a.m., and his father, Jose, are seen carrying Leslie's body out of the house, wrapped in a sheet and placing it in the trunk of the car. Eric then drives away while Jose hoses down the driveway to their house. These actions clearly indicated that Eric and Jose were not missing, but were fugitives from justice. After police saw the footage, a search warrant was obtained for Ibarra's home. As a result, detectives uncovered a lot of additional evidence showing that Leslie had not left the house voluntarily. The house had been cleaned with cleaning products in an unsuccessful attempt. Latex gloves and trash bags were also found, but the most important piece of evidence was the discovery in Eric's room. Traces of blood were found on the floor and on Eric's bed, an obvious sign of assault. And without DNA testing, it was clear to investigators that the blood belonged to Leslie. From that point on, Leslie Palacio was no longer missing, and investigators focused their efforts on finding her body. Eric and Jose were reported missing. As investigators searched diligently for suspects, the shaken Palacio family made efforts as well. Rosalia asked members of the church community to help search for her daughter's body as search volunteers. Flyers and posters with Leslie's photo and images of Eric and Jose appeared on social media, newspapers, and street poles. The Palacio family is asking the public to intervene and help them find these two men involved in the girl's death, was the message on each flyer. The first major breakthrough in the investigation came when a license plate reader spotted Eric's car just 6 miles from his home around 10 a.m. Agater, 29. He was heading back to his home just 4 hours after Leslie's alleged murder. The information uncovered made investigators realize that the location where Eric may have hidden the body was within a 4-hour drive of his home on the Nevada-Arizona border, or the Charleston Peak side, which is a huge area. So detectives were desperate for any additional information that could help them determine a more precise location. Once again, luck smiled on them when footage was recorded at a gas station 40 miles north of Las Vegas, showing Eric's car pulling off the highway toward the Valley of Fire National Park. The car backed up 20 minutes later with muddy tires. The find narrowed the search and pointed to the possible location of the body within 20 miles of the gas station. The mud on the tires suggested that Eric had driven off the road at some point. Detectives began searching the area. Police and volunteers combed through hundreds of acres of land. And on September 9th, during a second search, they found Leslie Palacio's body hidden near a bush. News outlets immediately spread the word. The body of 22-year-old Leslie Palacio has been found near the Valley of Fire 11 days after she disappeared. A reporter joined the report, providing additional details about the prime suspect, 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibarra. The Valley of Fire, where the body was found, is known for its hot climate, which led to rapid decomposition of the remains, and forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Locals reacted to Leslie's death with horror and fear. Some became afraid to go outside because of the constant thoughts of the uncaught criminals involved in the murder. The day after the body was discovered, September 10th, many friends, relatives, neighbors, and just random people in the area gathered to honor Leslie's memory. People took candles that were used for the nightly vigil and placed them in front of the girl's house. They also said they wanted the man responsible for her death to pay for what he did. The fight for justice was not even close to being over at this point. The next major breakthrough came when Eric's car flashed in Moreno Valley, California. Police eventually contacted Eric's cousin, and he reported that he had driven Jose and his son to San Isidro, where he believed they planned to cross the border into Mexico. The Las Vegas Police Department requested assistance from the FBI because it was not possible for them to resolve the jurisdictional issue on their own. The investigation slowed down. Then, on January 19, 2021, for months after the discovery of the girl's remains, Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border. Everyone was greatly relieved that at least one fugitive was now in custody. The man was quickly extradited back to Clark County and charged with destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. During interrogations, Jose tried to minimize his involvement in the crime, explaining the story of the trip to Mexico by his son's strange behavior on the morning of August 29th. However, investigators showing surveillance video footage debunked his false claims. The footage clearly showed him helping carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Faced with the evidence, Jose changed his testimony. He said he was working in the garage when Eric brought Leslie's body wrapped in a sheet into the garage. According to Jose, he panicked and helped his son load the body into the truck. Assuming that Leslie had died of an overdose of illegal drugs because he saw no visible injuries on the body. Court documents indicate that Jose initially told police that, according to Eric, Leslie died of an overdose of illegal drugs. Jose also explained that Eric immediately talked about wanting to end his life, blamed himself, and so he decided that the best thing to do for his son was to take him to Mexico. When investigators asked Jose for Eric's current whereabouts, He explained that as soon as the two of them entered Mexico and boarded the bus was searched by Mexican authorities. He and his son got scared and decided to split up, thinking that apart, it would be harder for the authorities to find them. For this reason, he would love to help the investigation, but has absolutely no idea where his son might be. On June 18, 2021, Jose formally pleaded guilty to destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. Despite the horrific characteristics of his crimes, Jose Ibarra was sentenced to only 2 years in the Clark County Detention Center, causing shock and dismay in the community. The Palacio family was shocked and outraged by Jose's lenient sentence, which they felt was unjust. During the pandemonium, Jose Ibarra joined the court proceedings virtually, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They urged the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was not enough for an accessory to murder who helped dispose of the body and hid the perpetrator. Jose Ibarra pleaded guilty and tried to apologize to Palacio's family, saying his love for his son outweighed him. He expressed regret for his actions. However, Leslie's family did not accept his apology and did not consider it sincere. To date, Eric's whereabouts remain unknown, and he continues to live a free life in Mexico. Jose was released on April 28, 2022. Ophelia Markarian, attorney and representative of the Palacio family, commented as follows, "I am absolutely furious. This is simply unfair. Not only is the main suspect not in custody, now the one who was involved in covering up the murder is back in custody after serving 8 months and 15 days. Over the past 3 years, the Palacio family has never gotten justice." Leslie's story highlights the flaws in the justice system and raises questions about fairness in dealing with serious crimes. The Palacio family is determined to fight to change the law in Neva because they believe that Weaver was involved in the murder, should receive a longer prison sentence than 2 years. They hope that the perpetrator will be found and prosecuted in the United States, where he will be charged and given the punishment he deserves. Ophelia Markarian is directly reaching out to those who may know of Eric's whereabouts in Mexico. In every media interview, she calls for Palacio's family to be given a small measure of justice. In the peaceful summer of the year 1975, a charming Pennsylvanian village called Brummel was thrown into gloominess by a terrifying occurrence that would plague the neighborhood for ages. On August 15, 1975, amidst the everyday routine, Gretchen Harrington, an innocent 8-year-old girl, inexplicably disappeared on her way to a Bible school program. By the time she was found, she had already been dead. Nobody knew who killed this young girl in Pennsylvania for nearly 50 years, but authorities now claim to have identified the culprit as a former pastor who has been residing in Marietta for some time. At the time, as days proceeded into weeks, then into months, and then into years, the town devotedly searched for its beloved young Gretchen, but like a dark maze, the answers eluded them, leaving them longing for resolution. Nevertheless, they never gave up hope. Get ready to have your world turned upside down because, in 2023, a shocking revelation shatters the stillness and rekindles the flames of justice in the pursuit of Gretchen Harrington's mystery. After 48 long years, the criminal who brought about Gretchen's awful demise was found. Surprisingly, this ruthless murderer had been concealing himself in plain sight by posing as a church minister, a typical example of what the Bible calls a wolf in sheep's clothing. Harold and Ina Harrington welcomed Gretchen into the world on June 13, 1967 in Marple Township, Pennsylvania. 8 years later, in the summer of 1975, there was a terrifying development just a short distance away from her home. Bright-eyed 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington was traveling to Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church for a Bible school session. She usually traveled with her older sisters, but on that particular day, she went there alone. By the next day, alarm bells rang for her frightened parents as the hours passed and the morning sun rose to its highest point. But there was no sign of Gretchen. They immediately called the Marple Township Police in a panicked state. The police then commenced a desperate search for their young daughter. Over 300 people from the entire community came together to search desperately for Gretchen, but as the hour wore on, she could not be found. This left nothing but a perplexing enigma afterwards. Gretchen would usually go up a steep hill to Trinity Chapel, enduring the trip past the store and townhouse complex. Around 925 YM, a neighbor claimed to have seen her. She appeared determined and focused to get to her destination. But mysteriously, she soon disappeared. People in the Harringtons' neighborhood wouldn't stand still and watch. Everyone wanted to help. As a result, 400 volunteers came together to form an army to help with the hunt through the thick undergrowth that covered the ground in the woods. They searched every square inch in the vicinity of the grocery store and housing developments in the hopes of finding some clues before dusk. Gretchen eluded them despite the fact that they traversed more than 5 square miles of hazardous terrain. The small village held its breath in prayer for her safe return, while the mystery behind her sudden disappearance made many hearts weary. The search for young Gretchen came to a puzzling dead end as the investigation progressed. The tracking dogs, talented as they were, detected no struggle or signs of discomfort halfway up that intimidating hill on Lawrence Road, leaving the question of what really happened to Gretchen hanging in the air. At that same moment, it appeared as though 8-year-old Gretchen had disappeared into thin air, leaving the police with a troubling judgment. They were of the opinion that Gretchen must have been driven away in a car. During these trying times, the neighborhood supported Gretchen's parents wholeheartedly. The Reformed Presbyterian Covenant Church minister, Harold Harrington, and his wife, Ina Harrington, raised their 4 daughters with care and tenderness. Although their Sundays had a hint of strictness, TV and outdoor play were forbidden on the holy day. Their family was united and harbored no known enemies. The entire community was adamant about finding out the truth because they wanted beloved Gretchen to be brought back to her home safely without any harm. The charm and warmth Gretchen Harrington exuded toward those she loved were as warm as the summer sun. Was she wary of strangers? Yes, but she was a vibrant spark of vitality in her school, especially when she finds herself among her group of friends. Her companionship brought comfort to classmates and neighbors who attended neighboring schools as well. She was an outstanding sportsman. She dominated the kickball court and the baseball diamond with her powerful home runs. Gretchen never knew her perception of life was going to change. 8 days before she disappeared, a new baby sister was birthed in their home, and Gretchen had been jokingly teasing about leaving if she got another sister, couldn't help but succumb to love's charm when she laid eyes on her baby sister. The community's ardent quest for Gretchen was now fueled by recollections of her brilliant smile and free-spirited spirit as they banded together to find their beloved Gretchen. Everyone clung to the hope that she would be returned to her devoted family. Where her sisters awaited her arrival and craved for more baseball games to be won, Harold and Ina firmly believed that their daughter, Gretchen, would never willingly get into another person's car. As the probe spread widely through the area, detectives knocked on doors, distributed leaflets with Gretchen's photo on them, and set up a 24-hour tip line. Over 200 calls flooded the hotline in those early days, and the diligent investigators followed every possible lead. Despite their diligence, however, the trail proved elusive, and none of the information presented gave a clear route to Gretchen's whereabouts. The small community in Gretchen's absence yearned for the day when her laughter would once more reverberate through their streets. The search for Gretchen felt like a desperate voyage through a maze with no exits. As the days stretched into 2 protracted weeks, detectives were forced to face a terrible truth. Despite their initial optimism that she might have been kidnapped for ransom, foul play was suddenly the menacing shadow they couldn't overlook. In an effort to find a lead that would help solve the case, they dispersed their efforts far and wide, covering Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey with missing person flyers. Tips and possible lead flooded the hotline. A glimmer of hope was won by each, but none could be verified. The cloud of mystery appeared to be broken by one lead, on the day Gretchen vanished. A truck driver who was traveling along Lawrence Road came forward to describe a scenario that matched Gretchen's description. He was able to clearly recall a green pickup truck that was parked halfway up the hill, heading towards Trinity Chapel. He claimed to have seen a young girl who possibly looked like Gretchen sitting inside the truck beside an unidentified man who happened to be the driver. The truck looked worn out, dated, and even without its tailgate. Thus, important details remained hidden. As the search continued, the community prayed that this tip might ultimately reveal Gretchen's whereabouts and provide consolation to her distraught family. As the coming weeks dragged on menacingly, some mystery reports began to surface from the shadows. According to a woman's statement, a man was seen on Lawrence Road, guiding a young child into a white compact automobile. Another witness, meanwhile, remembered seeing a white male, possibly a teenager, and a young child running in the direction of a white four-door automobile. The puzzle pieces appeared to taunt the detectives, but since none of the cars or their drivers could be recognized, the real story remained a secret. If any of these incidents had anything to do with Gretchen's disappearance, it was still unknown. The once-clawed hotline had grown near really calm by the end of September, and the case had started to lose its passion. The detectives painstakingly sought for prospective persons of interest, but were unable to come to any conclusive conclusions. The investigators worked hard to identify prospective persons of interest, but they had trouble conclusively linking any of them to Gretchen's disappearance. As promising leads dwindled and the terrifying truth became clear, the investigators' frustration increased. Since they didn't know what had happened, they were left to imagine whatever they wanted, in a last-ditch effort to solve the mystery. One detective turned to a psychic in an effort to find comfort in the paranormal. The psychic's disturbing declaration rumbled through the space like a chilling breeze when she mentioned that Gretchen was already dead. However, it was still unclear where her body was. The town held onto the dwindling glimmer of hope, praying that they would find Gretchen and bring her home. The town was distraught and yearned for answers. But as the weeks and months passed, the mystery grew more complex, leaving everyone to wonder what actually happened to Gretchen Harrington on the gloomy day of October 14th, 1975. Tragically, as fate had it, the search for Gretchen came to an end. A Philadelphia Naval Yard seaman was stopped in his tracks by an unbelievable discovery while jockeying through Delaware County's Ridley Creek State Park. Hidden in the park's shadows are human remains. Despite the body's advanced state of decomposition, investigators were possessed by a terrifying certainty. They had a gut feeling they had located Gretchen. The clothing that was discovered there provided a chilling confirmation, and the grim identification was completed by dental records. The town, overcome with grief, lamented the passing of their once lively young girl, whose spirit now seemed to reverberate through the trees of the very park, where she was laid to rest. The mystery surrounding Gretchen's tragic death persisted, leaving everyone with unanswered questions and a hole in their hearts. As the neighborhood struggled to cope with their loss, they vowed to honor Gretchen's memory by cherishing the joy she had offered in her short life and the effect she had on every person she came into contact with. She may be gone too soon, but her memories would stay in their hearts forever. As the town was desperate for the hunt of Gretchen's killer, state troopers diligently searched the park grounds with metal detectors in the hopes of finding some scrap of information that would bring the case to a conclusion. Detectives organized numerous interviews by examining the lives of local sexual offenders, but the trail was frustratingly elusive. They had strong suspicions about a specific person, but they were unable to prove it, so they were able to keep the suspect's identity a secret. This convicted sex offender, who was eventually detained on unrelated charges, emerged as a person of interest in Gretchen's case, but the investigative team had some reservations about this supposition. However, the tenacious search for additional leads went on. The community of Blummo yearned for justice and resolution as the once thriving tip slowly fizzled away and the case went cold. In November 1983, just as it seemed that time had forgotten Gretchen's tragedy, her case came to life once more. There was some hope when a Marple Township detective received an anonymous letter from someone claiming to have crucial information about the case. The lead detective made a sincere plea for the writer of the letter to come forward and provide more information, but the mystery informant remained silent, protecting their identity for years to come. As the years went by, those who loved Gretchen carried her memory with them forever. Her family was desperate for information and held out hope that, soon enough, the truth would come to light and that justice would be served for their sweet girl whose life was taken from her far too soon. Investigators made a significant discovery in early 2023 when they spoke with a criminal informant who had attended school with both Gretchen and Zoe Harrington, one of Gretchen's sisters. This police informant, who was a lady, recalled her being friends with the daughter of a man called David Zenstra. She mentioned how she frequently played at the Zenstra's house and many a time stayed for sleepovers. But her innocent recollections quickly turned into a disturbing account when she told the police that during 2 of those sleepovers, Mr. Zenstra made inappropriate advances towards her. She said she had woken up to him touching her in a very uncomfortable manner. As she continued with her testimony, the woman shared with the detectives a diary from her past. This diary had once been filled with a young girl's dreams, but soon turned out to display an unsettling confession written in her innocence. This confession was penned down a few days after Gretchen vanished. On September 15, 1975, the confession read, "Guess what? A man tried to kidnap Holly twice," talking about a student in her class. She continued, "Holly had scribbled it a secret, so I can't tell anyone, but I think he might be the one who kidnapped Gretchen. I think it was Mr. Z." She was making an oblique reference to David Zenstra. The sentence ended abruptly, giving away a sinister secret she was unable to reveal to anyone. The revelation sparked a flurry of new inquiries into David Zanstra's past, and the pieces of the puzzle started to come together as suspicions were raised that Zenstra might be the actual perpetrator of Gretchen's kidnapping. Shortly after the murder, it was discovered that these Zanstras had hurriedly relocated to Plano, Texas, in order to avoid the attention of the time. Investigators were determined to look into the case further in light of the chilling truth, reviving the long-dimmed hope. Justice for Gretchen appeared to be on the horizon, but only time would tell if the long-buried secrets would come to light and Gretchen's family would finally receive the closure they had long sought. When authorities learned of the new information, they embarked on a determined search to find David Zenstra, who had moved to Marietta, Georgia, northwest of Atlanta. At the time of Gretchen's tragic disappearance, he held the position as a reverend at Trinity Church Chapel Christian Reformed Church in Brummel, and he was said to have been reportedly close to the Harringtons. His close friendship with the Harrington family gave him the chance to take advantage of Gretchen's trust that fateful morning. Zenstra had a history of being very active in religious communities, as evidenced by his past. In the 1960s, he was ordained as a minister in New Jersey. Later, he relocated to Chester, Pennsylvania, to start a new church. He was actively involved in Trinity Church Chapel by the early 1970s, where he oversaw the Bible school Gretchen attended and led youth summer workshops. The puzzle started to come together, and David Zenstra was surrounded by a growing cloud of suspicion. Gretchen's quest for justice was no longer a pipe dream. It was reachable, but there was no guarantee that it would be. The path to resolution would be paved with revelations and painstaking investigation in an effort to shed light on what happened to the young girl who was tragically abducted from her family. A startling revelation was made during the interview with David Zenstra on July 17, 2023, at Cobb County Police Headquarters in Marietta. He denied any involvement at first, but eventually broke down and admitted to the wicked deed. David Zenstra acknowledged seeing Gretchen heading towards the church that fateful morning. After convincing her that he was taking her to church, he picked her up in his green AMC Rambler station wagon. Gretchen never knew his motives were much darker. Instead of the church, Zenstra took her to a wooded area close by and asked her to take her clothes off. According to him, Gretchen declined. At that point, he was already overcome with desire and ejaculated in the car while she was still inside. In a fit of rage, he struck Gretchen violently with his fist and she began bleeding from her head as a result. After the tragic event, he attempted to cover Gretchen's naked body with sticks after realizing that she appeared to be dead. He then fled the scene, leaving her lifeless body in the bleak woods. The chilling confession revealed the monstrous deeds of someone who was supposed to be a man of God and a dependable friend of Gretchen's family, painting a horrifying picture of betrayal and brutality. The revelation of the truth brought with it a sense of closure for Gretchen's loved ones, as well as intense pain and sorrow over the loss of an innocent life that had been taken so brutally. When 83-year-old David Zenstra of Marietta, Georgia, was formally charged with Gretchen's murder on July 24, 2023 by the District Attorney's Office in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, justice for Gretchen finally started to take shape. A slew of charges, including criminal homicide, kidnapping of a minor, possessing an instrument of crime, and murder in the first, second, and third degrees, were brought against the man who had previously worked as a minister at the church in the 1970s. When David Zanstra was refused bail and imprisoned in Cobb County, Georgia, he resisted being extradited to Pennsylvania, which prompted the authorities to request a governor's warrant to transport him to Delaware. David Zanstra would likely be found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. According to County District Attorney Stolzheimer, who promised to see that justice was done, the haunting cloud that had hung over Brummel for almost 48 years began to lift as the community found solace in the knowledge that the man responsible for Gretchen's kidnapping and murder would finally face the consequences of his actions. Gretchen's case had a significant impact on the community, and Marple Township's police chief, Brandon Greff, recognized how the town had changed as a result. An important step toward resolution was made with the charges brought against David Zanstra. Gretchen and her grieving family finally received long overdue vindication. The promise of justice offered a glimmer of hope that Gretchen's tragic story would serve as a warning, ensuring that no other child would suffer from such evil once more. However, the memory of Gretchen's stolen innocence would always remain in her family's hearts. Gretchen's tragic fate had a significant effect on the formerly picture-perfect town of Brummel in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. On that tragic day in August 1975, the community's innocence was lost, leaving a lasting scar on the lives of the kids, parents, families, and everyone else who called the town home. The eagerly anticipated trial that is about to start promises to provide answers and closure to the community that has been burdened by this tragic chapter for such a long time. Will justice prevail, bringing comfort to the town and the family of Gretchen? What mysteries will be revealed during the trial, illuminating the shadows that once surrounded their lives? When a decision is made, we'll post an update. Law enforcement officers are tasked with protecting the legal rights and interests of the citizens of their country, ensuring public order safety, and identifying and stopping any violations. Theoretically, the charter and principles of law enforcement operations sound flawless, but in real life, there are cases that literally make your blood run cold when people who are meant to serve and protect violate the law themselves or cover up for those who do. Such wrongful actions often lead to real criminal schemes, resulting in severe consequences. The case of Valyriia Vivanco, a police officer who died in the line of duty, gained widespread resonance not only in Chile, where the tragic events unfolded, but also in the media of other countries. Essentially, the young woman's life was ended by a colleague who was supposed to protect her and ensure her safety. The most horrifying aspect was that the higher authorities knew about this and attempted to distort the facts, accusing another person of the incident and hiding the real circumstances of the event. Although the actual culprit of the tragedy was identified and even sentenced to a real prison term, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, whether it was a tragic accident or if it was deliberate. Moreover, it's puzzling why he was covered and defended by high-ranking individuals for so long. Even after it seemed the guilty party had faced punishment, the Supreme Court, upon reviewing an appeal, shocked the victim's family with its unexpected decision. Who was Valyriia Vivanco? Valyriia Fernanda Vivanco was born on May 29, 1996, in the small commune of La Granja, located near the city of Santiago, the capital of Chile, and was the youngest of 3 children in the simple family of Miguel and Jacqueline Vivanco. She was raised alongside her older biological brother, Michelangelo, and sister, Daniela. The family patriarch worked for a company involved in the transportation of passengers and goods, while her mother was a homemaker dedicated to raising her children and creating a cozy home environment. When Valyriia started school, her parents decided to separate. This was a huge shock for the girl, and although the ex-spouses continued to communicate post-divorce, and the father remained actively involved in the lives of his children from his first marriage, including providing financial support, the youngest daughter harbored resentment towards him. They occasionally argued, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. Miguel Vivanco remarried soon after, and Valyriia gained 2 more half-siblings, with whom she as well as Daniela and Michelangelo maintained warm family relations. Jacqueline never remarried, raised her children, and later took care of her grandchildren, gifted to her by her older offspring. From an early age, Valyriia demonstrated a strong-willed character, determination, and incredible perseverance in all her endeavors. She excelled in school, engaged in sports, was courageous and just, and was always ready to help others, sometimes even at risk to herself. It was likely this desire to assist those around her, protect the vulnerable, and stand up for justice that led her to pursue a career in the police force. After successfully completing high school, Valyriia enrolled in the police academy in Santiago. She graduated with honors, becoming an investigator, and having received her diploma in 2016 at the age of 20, joined the Chilean police force the following year. She began her service in the bureau, investigating especially serious crimes located in the capital. From the first days of her service, young Valyriia proved herself to be a dedicated law enforcement officer and a true fighter for justice. She loved her job, performed her duties diligently, and was ready to rush anywhere at any time if required by her service. She could leave in the middle of the night to respond to a crime scene, chased after criminals, risking herself, and sometimes had to act as a psychologist when interacting with people who had lost loved ones. Colleagues described Vivanco as kind, cheerful, and friendly. Yet she was a true professional and a reliable partner. She served in the police force for almost 5.5 years, during which she received a vast number of accolades, awards, and actively advanced in her career, earning the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of the leadership. Additionally, she represented her department in Spain, spending about 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit. She was immensely proud to be entrusted with such responsible missions. By 2020, she had been promoted to assistant inspector, the new young colleague. In January 2020, a new member was welcomed to the precinct where Valyriia worked, 21-year-old Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales. Fresh out of the police academy, Valyriia effectively became his mentor at his first job. A few months later, they became partners and initially got along pretty well. Little is known about Lionel's early years. Some information suggests he came from a rather influential and affluent family, with a high-ranking official as his uncle. Growing up in comfort, never wanting for anything, Lionel was quite self-centered, believing everything should go his way. Valyriia quickly caught the eye of her new colleague and partner as he made various attempts to show her attention, tried to court her, and even asked her out a few times, but was met with firm rejection each time. Valyriia took her job very seriously, considered workplace romances inappropriate, and was quite strict with the young coworker, seeing him as immature. The issue wasn't so much the age difference. Lionel was only 3 years younger, as it was his behavior, which Valyriia found childish but helped to help him mature. In July 2020, Valyriia and her young partner were involved in apprehending robbers who had stolen money from a store's cash register. The criminals, not having left the scene and armed, initiated a shootout, during which both were fatally engaged by Lionel. Although casualties could have been avoided, Lionel's actions were not deemed excessive for apprehending the individuals. However, this incident strained the relationship between the partners. The last birthday, on May 29, 2021, Valyriia celebrated her 25th birthday. The celebration took place at her mother's house, attended by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. Lionel, however, was not among the invited. Valyriia, aiming to avoid potential awkwardness, chose not to invite her young partner, who had recently attempted to court her again. Valyriia tried to talk to him about this, but he only repeated his affections for her, which she did not want other colleagues to find out about. Despite the large turnout, gifts, heartfelt congratulations, and warm wishes, the birthday girl seemed upset, though she tried to smile. The reason was a recent argument with her father, leading to days without communication. Valyriia hoped her father would attend her birthday, allowing them to reconcile. But the likely angered parent only sent a terse congratulatory message, not even calling. Jacqueline noticed her daughter's distress and knew the reason behind her hidden sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she believed Miguel would eventually call Valyriia, talk things out, and reconcile as they always had before. Unfortunately, the father and daughter never got the chance to talk again, as 2 weeks later, Valyriia tragically lost her life while on duty. The fatal shot. On June 13, 2021, Valyriia was on night duty, participating in street patrols and vehicle checks. This was not a standard procedure, but a search for suspects related to the crime against a young woman that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. There was an alert for a white Kia Torado, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal. The suspect likely had a weapon and might not have been alone in the car. Valyriia was in a patrol car with her partner, Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gallardo Araya. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and initiated a pursuit without waiting for backup. The officers managed to intercept and block the suspect's escape. Pamales and Vivanco exited their vehicle, weapons drawn, and called for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands up. At that moment, a single shot rang out, and as everyone tried to understand who fired and where, Valyriia, fletching her side, fell to the asphalt next to the police car. Reinforcements arrived just then, till her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but couldn't fully grasp what had happened and who had fired. The criminals, seizing the moment of confusion, accelerated and fled the scene while the injured officer was being administered first aid. Despite the rapid arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stem the bleeding, Valyriia could not be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought for her life for several hours. However, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, she passed away on the operating table without regaining consciousness. When her family was informed, her parents, brothers, and sisters immediately rushed to the hospital. But by then, wounded officer had already died. Miguel was not just stricken with grief, but utterly devastated, as he had not had the chance to speak and reconcile with his beloved daughter, with whom he had had a petty argument last. He felt a profound sense of guilt toward her, so shaken by the event that he himself required medical attention to prevent a heart attack. The search and arrest of the suspects, according to the official version, Vivanco died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals. She was hailed as a hero who gave her life for the peace and safety of others. This incident was widely covered in local media, with reporters vividly describing the young officer's heroism and self-sacrifice. The investigation was handled by specialists from the Homicide and Major Crimes Division, where Valyriia herself had worked. They concluded that she died from a shot to the abdomen. Fired by someone facing her from the direction of the suspect's vehicle she was pursuing with her colleagues. Everything seemed logical, with witnesses corroborating the story, making it appear that the case was solved and all that remained was to find and punish the culprits who were still at large and possibly on the run. Soon after, the suspects were apprehended, generating widespread public attention. The criminals turned out to be 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cañapan and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was withheld due to his minor status, both previously convicted for minor offenses. The then president of Chile, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera Echenique, issued an official statement promising that the perpetrators would be brought to justice with all the rigor of the law. Something doesn't add up. After the autopsy and all necessary examinations were conducted, the body of the deceased Vivanco was handed over to her family and was buried with honors at one of the capital cemeteries. Hundreds of people came to pay their last respects, expressing their sincere condolences to the girl's family. According to Jacqueline and Miguel, the entire ordeal seemed like a horrific dream, and they hardly remembered the events of the funeral day. Among the men carrying Valyria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who appeared to mourn her more than anyone else. However, according to other colleagues, there had been some tension between the partners lately, to the extent that the girl didn't even invite the young man to her birthday celebration. Almost immediately after the funeral, court proceedings began regarding the suspects who were apprehended the day after the incident and were in custody. At that moment, everyone was confident that the culprits were caught, and proving their guilt seemed straightforward, especially since they began to give confessional testimonies. However, it soon became clear that the investigation had been flawed from the start, with critical details overlooked and key findings from forensic experts downplayed. The process was mishandled, and high-ranking officials tried to conceal the identity of the true culprit behind the girl's demise. Thus, about a month and a half after the officer's death, the case took an unexpected turn. By the end of July, 2 employees were suspended from their duties, allegedly involved in the incident leading to Valyria's death. On August 1st, The deceased girl's parents were called to the capital's prosecutor's office for a meeting on an important matter. The parents thought that new evidence had emerged in their daughter's case, and that the detainees, awaiting their final sentence, would finally receive deserved punishment. However, the grief-stricken Jacqueline and Miguel were shocked to learn that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. This was personally communicated to them by prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco, who also conveyed his condolences and apologies on behalf of the entire investigative department. Valyria's parents were bewildered. They couldn't believe their ears and couldn't understand how such a thing could happen. They relived their grief anew and wanted clarification on the situation and why this information only became known so much later. As it turned out, that single fatal shot came from the service weapon in the hands of one of the girl's colleagues. This was confirmed by a ballistics examination conducted that same day, but its results were somehow distorted and the bullet extracted from the body was sent to the evidence locker with entirely different characteristics, shape, caliber, weight, etc. Furthermore, the bullet had exited through and through, and it was not extracted from the body. The entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were accidentally or intentionally confused. That is, the bullet did not enter through the abdomen and exit through the back, but quite the opposite. The shot was fired at her back. Some pages from the autopsy report were missing, while others were clearly altered and replaced. Additionally, the detainees, over whom the trial was proceeding and who supposedly confessed to their guilt and were about to be imprisoned, started filing complaints. They claimed that their confessions were coerced through torture and threats, and the pistol they had on them that evening wasn't even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the earlier crime, which prompted the interception plan that fateful night, was also unconfirmed. New suspects in a twist, Vivanco went from being seen as a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to a victim of betrayal, killed by her own colleagues. Given the new circumstances, the primary suspects became Felipe Gilardo Araya, who was driving the police car, and Valyria's partner, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, who was seated in the back. Both suspects were immediately suspended from duty. Thus, on August 5th, it became known that the bullet that killed Valyriia was fired from a service weapon. Subsequently, a document emerged with the results of the examination indicating that only Kamal's had gunshot residue on his hands, making him the prime suspect. Notably, this finding had not been mentioned anywhere before, as if it never existed. Several other reports concerning the ballistics examination and the pathologist's conclusions were improperly filed, and ended up in an archive box which was never adequately checked. Whether this was an accident, criminal negligence, or intentional concealment of crucial facts was yet to be determined. Now the police officers who participated in the operation to apprehend the criminals themselves became suspects in the murder of their colleague. They, along with the previously arrested perpetrators, took part in a reenactment of the events of that night. Philippe claimed that from the driver's seat, he could only see Valyriia, who was seated next to him in the front passenger seat and was the first to exit the car. Lionel was sitting behind and also exited the vehicle, but his actions could not be seen by the driver. Valyriia had only taken a few steps when a shot was fired. She fell, and the suspect's car they were chasing sped away. Lionel then rushed to the injured woman to provide first aid. Lionel claimed that he and his partner exited the patrol car almost simultaneously, but she immediately rushed forward when the shot was fired. He insisted that he did not shoot his colleague, and the driver should have seen and confirmed this. He also confirmed that he was the first to rush to Valyria's aid and tried to compress her wound. Despite differences in the direct participants' testimonies, the reconstruction showed that Canales was behind his partner at the moment of the shot, and the bullet's trajectory matched his location. He was also the only person found with gunshot residue on his hands. Possible motives for the crime. After previously hidden reports and examination results were released, Lionel was taken into custody as the primary suspect, while the young men previously detained were released under a non-exit agreement, as there was effectively nothing to charge them with. However, the motive behind the young officer's actions remained unclear. The first and main theory was that the entire incident was a tragic accident. Supposedly, the young and inexperienced officer discharged his weapon unintentionally while standing behind his partner. He panicked, tried to help her, and when turning in his service weapon that day, insisted he hadn't fired it. However, the truth quickly surfaced, and influential relatives of the young man, using all their power, money, and connections, attempted to suppress the incident. Hence, the cleaned reports, missing documents, confusion in the evidence, and coerced testimonies from the detained. Another theory, partially confirmed by Lionel himself, was that he was unrequitedly in love with Valyriia and desperately sought her attention. But all his efforts were in vain. Over time, he began to merely irritate the girl, who didn't even invite him to her birthday party attended by the entire department. The shot in the back was his revenge for the rejection. A third theory, proposed by the deceased's relatives, suggested that Valyriia discovered something she wasn't supposed to know. Some corruption scheme, official crimes, or something similar. As an honest and fair person, she would undoubtedly have exposed the culprits, which is why she was eliminated and young Lionel was chosen as the executor, promised that he would remain above suspicion. The second suspect. Despite Canales being taken into custody, suspicions about Felipe were not entirely dispelled. He was armed with identical service weapons, also stood behind the deceased colleague, and could have fired the shot. Moreover, he had previously been disciplined for the unjustified use of a weapon during a criminal arrest, though no one was harmed in that instance. Valyriia had since been nicknamed the Reckless Shooter. The defense team hired by the relatives to defend Lionel immediately seized this theory, insisting that Philippe accidentally shot the colleague, and since the service weapons were identical, the pistols could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Additionally, the man was inconsistent in his testimony, changing it several times, and later he claimed he could not accurately describe the events of that night, as everything happened very quickly. However, no gunpowder residue was found on the driver's hands, indicating his innocence. In response, Jim Alish claimed that gunpowder got on his hands when he was compressing the wound on the victim's body, and Valyriia, who also helped the woman, might have washed his hands before the examination. Yet this statement was not credible, as Valyria's bloodstains remained on Philippe's hands, and it's impossible to wash off gunpowder without removing blood. The quality of the investigative team's work was once again questioned, and the deceased girl's parents despaired, unsure how to achieve justice. Furthermore, the new turn in the case caused public outrage and led to mistrust in the law enforcement agencies. This story was now covered not only by Chilean, but also international media. As a result, many high-ranking officials were suspended from work and soon lost their positions, particularly the head of the Homicide Investigation Department. After additional investigation, Lionel remained the only suspect, with all others excluded from the list and classified as witnesses. In the spring of 2022, he was officially dismissed and remained in custody until the trial's conclusion. The hearings for this case only began in March of the following year, and based on the evidence and witness testimony, the suspect's guilt was fully proven. Initially, the prosecution accused Kamala of intentionally murdering his partner and sought the maximum sentence for such cases. However, the accused insisted he would never harm Valyriia as he loved her. Nonetheless, it was from his pistol that the bullet was fired, ending the girl's life. Lionel was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. Following the announcement of the final verdict, the Vivanco family expressed their disagreement, considering the sentence too lenient, while the defendant and his legal team immediately filed a series of appeals. However, the real shock came to Valyriia's relatives in February 2024, when the Supreme Court unexpectedly overturned the previously assigned punishment, sentencing the perpetrator to only 540 days of imprisonment, counted from the day of his arrest. Effectively, he walked free from the courtroom. The detective Valyriia Vivanco's family, in light of this event, plans to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. In an official statement, the deceased girl's mother said, "The 12-year sentence already seemed too lenient to us, but this is just mockery. I feel as if my daughter has died all over again. I no longer believe in justice. Our family plans to sue the negligent Chilean state." Few persons are now swept up in a whirlwind of terrifying revelations as a result of a once-hidden secret that has suddenly burst open. The chilling story of Holly Klouse from Oklahoma has surfaced from the depths of a cold case that lasted over 40 years, revealing a terrifying timeline of incidents that rocked the small town to its foundation. The murder of Holly's parents, Harold Dean Klouse and Tina Galen, and the unceremonious disposal of their dead bodies in the woods east of Houston in 1981, seemed to seal the fate of Holly's sudden disappearance as an unsolved case. But, despite everything, a startling turn of events has brought this puzzling case back into the public eye when Holly Klouse is found 41 years later, giving her grieving family hope for explanations and justice. Holly's case appeared in the distant past on the vast timeline of history, breaking through the formerly impenetrable veil of obscurity. She is the lost daughter who has now been found. Holly's discovery, however, brought up even more questions than it did solutions. Where has Holly been for the past 4 decades, and who killed her parents? Harold and Tina. We go back in time to a chilly winter day on January 12, 1981, in the vast wilderness of northern Harris County, Texas, just outside the bustling boundaries of Houston City. That day, a civilian's dog decided to venture out into the arid woods, only to return with the terrifying remains of a human arm in its jaw. The skin was rotting, telling a terrible story about what was concealed among the dense vegetation. The frantic search that followed this grisly discovery revealed a dark secret concealed in the dense forest close to Wallaceville Road. As the sun bounced off the tall trees, it created an erratic pattern of shadows that deceived the eye. The only sound in this silent, desolate woods came from the skeleton leaves being crunched under the civilian foot, and the dog's poo. The sound of the dog barking in the distance broke the stillness of the woods. The perplexing dog worked furiously to unearth something from a heap beneath a massive old tree. The civilian observed the dog's frenzied excitement. Intense anticipation. His tail whipped from side to side. The civilian felt shivers run through his soul as he came to a terrifying realization. Beneath the deceiving covering of fallen leaves was a shallow grave harboring the grim death of 2 bodies, interlaced and neatly placed beside each other. The gravity of this gruesome discovery weighed heavily on the civilian's mind. He ran recklessly in the direction of the closest phone booth and dialed 911. Because of the shock of the discovery, his voice was trembling as he spoke to the operator at the other end of the line. The couple's decayed bodies lied in the dark green area, only a few feet apart. Their bodies tragically bore the impact of time, giving in to decay and wearing away. This stipulated that they had been dead for a couple of months. Both bodies had been concealed in the woods just 100 yards from Wallaceville Road. When investigators arrived on the scene, they were looking for any hints that might help them determine who the deceased were. They came across a horrifying scene. They identified the first body to be a young woman between the ages of 15 and 25. She was between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 9 inches tall. She was white with possible Native American blend. Her body was found close to a pair of green running shorts, and she had long reddish-brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. The woman had been choked to death. She was covered in a bloody towel and was otherwise naked. Although no additional clothing was discovered at the scene, detectives noted that the woman probably had a gap in her teeth and had short, stubby nails. A young man's body believed to be between 20 and 30 years old lay next to her, though it was possible that he was as young as 15, since it was in the 1980s. They did not have the same forensic advancements that exist today. He was between 5 feet 4 and 5 feet tall. He was white and had brown hair and eyes. The man's neck showed signs of degeneration in the upper vertebrae, which may have been caused by a previous injury. He had prominent eyebrows and his wisdom teeth had either been extracted or had not yet fully developed, according to the investigators. The victim had been beaten to death after being stripped, bound, and ganged. Investigators in Harris County were left with many unanswered questions following the shocking discovery of these 2 young people. Who were these people, and what circumstances led to their tragic end? Investigators hoped to be able to solve this mystery as they continued to piece together the available evidence. As if the discovery of the 2 decaying bodies in these woods wasn't terrifying enough, the neighborhood was shocked when a 3rd body was found there 18 months later. This time, it was the body of 15-year-old Michelle Garvey, who had been missing for a month. Michelle had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Her life was violently taken away from her in a cruel manner. It was obvious that Michelle's body had been there for some time when investigators arrived at the scene, because neither shoes nor a bra were to be found. The mystery surrounding the tragic deaths of these young people was further complicated by the fact that Michelle's body was found in the exact same location as the earlier discovered bodies. This only increased the sense of unease in the neighborhood as many people began to wonder if there was a link between Michelle's death and the deaths of the two previously found bodies. The task ahead of them was daunting, but investigators were determined to find the answers to the numerous questions that remained after these shocking revelations. The other two bodies that were discovered before Michelle's were not immediately identified, but Michelle was. To reconstruct the couple found in the woods, forensic artist Mary Mace was hired to do the job. The hopes that someone would come forward with information about their identities. The reconstruction was widely disseminated, but no one came forward with any helpful leads. The investigators had to file the case away as unsolved because there were so few clues to continue with the investigation. 30 years later, in 2011, it was decided to exhume the bodies of the unidentified couple in order to gather DNA samples. This resulted in yet another dead end, and the investigation was closed. Then, in January 2022, new information was discovered in a twist that nobody anticipated. The case of the unidentified couple discovered in the Houston woods has finally made some headway after 41 long years of unsolved mysteries. In 2022, the challenging task of identifying the two bodies was assigned to forensic scientist Alison Peacock of FHD Forensics. She and her team got to work, entering the DNA data into the national database of genetic profiles called GEDmatch. They were shocked to learn of a match to the male victim's cousin who lived in Kentucky. After getting in touch with him, they finally were able to identify the two people who had been discovered buried in the woods as 17-year-old Tina Gale Klouse, formerly known as Tina Galen, and her husband, 21-year-old Harold Dean Klouse. The year 1978 saw a destined meeting of Harold Dean Klouse Jr. and Tina Galen in the blissful Florida community of New Smyrna Beach. When she was only 15, young Tina found herself drawn to the slightly older Harold Dean, who was 19 years old at the time. In an ironic turn of events, their families were already intertwined because Tina's brother and Harold's sister had started a relationship of their own. Harold and Tina were caught up in a whirlwind of romance that picked them up and carried them quickly to the Volusia County Courthouse under Florida's colorful skies. They exchanged marriage vows there on June 25, 1979, cementing their ardent love. The birth of Holly Marie Klouse on January 24, 1980, was a sign of their ardent love and dedication to one another. Despite being young, Harold and Tina were admired by their friends and family for their unwavering commitment to parenthood. As the 1980s began to take shape, Harold and Tina bid a fond farewell to the well-known Florida shores. They focused their attention on a new life and ventured into the sweltering heat of Louisville, Texas, a developing suburb buzzing with the promise of prosperity. Harold, a master woodworker who lived in the vibrant energy of the Dallas metropolitan area, had his sights set on taking advantage of the construction boom that swept the area in the early 1980s. The couple had high hopes for a prosperous future in the Texan trade industry thanks to Harold's skills as a skilled cabinet maker. According to their devoted relatives back home, their relationship remained without a scratch. There were no arguments or tensions. The couple's relationship appeared to be hooded by a perfect harmony. They kept their loved ones informed of their Texan journey through regular phone calls. However, in October 1980, as the autumn leaves started to fall, an unsettling silence soon descended upon the familial phone lines connecting Harold and Tina with their families. The happy chatter suddenly stopped, leaving a jarring silence with a sinister air of mystery. It was unknown what had happened to the couple in the months that had followed. Their killer or killers as well was still a mystery. But perhaps the investigators would finally be able to learn the truth since their identities were finally established. Their demise is thought to have taken place between October 1980 and January 1981. When Alice and Peacock contacted the families, Harold's mother provided them with their first tip. She explained that toward the end of December 1980, a sister named Susan called to let them know that Tina and Harold had joined their little religious community and no longer desired to communicate with their families. Sister Susan then requested $1,000 to transport the couple's car, a red 1978 AMC Concorde, back to Florida as part of the group's requirements for joining. Clearly concerned for Harold and Tina's safety, the family made the decision to call the police. They were instructed by the police to indulge Susan. Finally, a man and two women showed up at the race named by police as soon as the family received the car. At the time, a police report was made for this operation. Unfortunately, the 1980 police report has not yet been located, which poses a serious obstacle for the investigation. When Harold's sister brought up the missing baby during the same conversation, Allison's heart sank. In their investigation, that particular detail had never surfaced. There had already been so many twists and turns in the case, and now there might be a missing child. After taking a deep breath, Allison made a promise to Harold's sister that they would do everything possible to discover what had happened to the baby. Allison learned that Harold and Tina did indeed have a child as she investigated the situation further. A kid called Holly Klouse. When her parents disappeared, she was only a few months old and she was never seen or heard from again. Allison was adamant about learning what had become of Holly, but it seemed like an overwhelming task. Investigators began a thorough national search for Holly because they were driven to learn the truth, but they had to first figure out how to spell her name. Although some detectives dismissed it as a minor problem, Allison Peacock knew that getting the name correct was essential to locating her. Allison and Harold's sister asked for access to her birth record from Florida's Department of Vital Records to determine the proper spelling, but they were turned down. This started a difficult and uphill battle in which the authorities rejected each request for the record. Peacock and her group, though, were unyielding. Before eventually receiving access to Holly's birth certificate, investigators worked their way up the ranks of those involved in the case, from detectives to senior prosecutors, judges, and finally, attorney generals from 3 different states. They soon learned that Holly had been adopted by a family nearby. She had grown up and was going about her life. Completely oblivious to her disastrous past, Holly's birth certificate was sealed in the United States, which is why it was difficult to obtain. Following an adoption, it is common practice to seal birth certificates, making it challenging to obtain a copy of the record, except through a court order. This also implies that the birth certificate is accompanied by an adoption certificate. It was Allison Peacock's unwavering persistence in locating Holly's name's proper spelling that allowed for the eventual acquisition of the birth certificate. Whether it was merely a coincidence or deliberate action is unknown. But the truth is that Holly might not have been found without Allison's commendable efforts. After this discovery, the police descended on Holly's workplace and learned her origin story, which they had painstakingly uncovered from a maze of lost paperwork and neglected archives. Holly, Harold and Tina's daughter, who is now 42 and a mother of 5 who lives in Oklahoma, was finally reunited with her remaining biological family as the investigators continued to delve deeper into the mysterious case of Harold and Tina. Everyone involved was happy and relieved because they had long given up on ever finding her. But there are still many unanswered questions about the circumstances surrounding her adoption. The case was far from over, despite the excitement of the moment. Holly's parents were murdered, and the identity of the murderer is still a mystery, as are the circumstances surrounding Holly's adoption. Investigators soon found out that 2 women who belonged to a nomadic religious group had left Holly at a church in Arizona. These women were barefoot and wore robes. Their religion remained a mystery because the officials were reluctant to provide any information. However, they did reveal that the group believed in veganism and thought that men and women should be kept apart. The religious group is known to have visited Arizona, California, and possibly Texas while touring the southern United States. The group was reportedly seen in the early 1980s around Yuma, Arizona, with its female members begging for food. The case appeared to have all the elements of a classic detective story. With plenty of leads to pursue but no obvious solutions, Holly's amazing discovery had only raised more issues and led to dead ends. With no clear solution in sight, Holly's extraordinary discovery had untangled a thread that led down a maze of questions. Her complicated adoption history started to come into focus as the murky role of a roving religious sect became clear. detectives nevertheless reaffirmed their dedication to the investigation, strengthened by their belief that the religious organization was the key to cracking this unsolved case. They showed firm commitment to uncovering the truth in order to bring Holly and her biological roots some form of justice. We are faced with an unknown that is full of enticing secrets that are just waiting to be revealed. We wait for shocking revelations, the echoes of the past growing louder with each passing moment. This investigation into the history of the mysterious and unsolved has only just begun, so there is still much to learn. Subscribe and stay connected with us to get an update on the case when the detectives finally crack the mystery behind Harold and Tina's death. The death of Diane and Alan Johnson shocked the peaceful community to its core. On September 2, 2003, the Blaine County Sheriff's Office received a distressing 911 call from King Richards. According to Kim, her neighbor's 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Johnson, had come running to her door screaming that her parents, 52-year-old Diane and 46-year-old Alan Scott Johnson, had been murdered. Officers and first responders were dispatched to the scene immediately. When law enforcement officials arrived, they entered the house and found a gruesome scene before them. In the bed, they found Diane with a gunshot to her head. She appeared to have been killed while she slept. The walls and the ceiling near the headboard were splattered with blood, and a fragment of skull was on the floor. On the floor next to Diane's side of the bed was the body of her husband, Alan. He was clad only in a towel, and blood was pooling beneath him. At first glance, investigators believed it was an opening-shut case. It appeared to have been a case of murder-suicide. But as they looked closer at the crime scene, their opinion quickly changed. Investigators could hear the sound of water running and followed the blood trail back to the ensuite bathroom. The shower was left on. When officers turned the water faucet off, they saw blood splatter and a distinct bullet hole on the shower wall. Investigators began searching the house for more clues. On the bedroom floor was what investigators believed was the murder weapon, a .264 caliber Winston rifle. At the foot of the bed in which Diane lay dead were 2 kitchen knives. Another knife was found on their son Matt's bed. The clues at the scene puzzled investigators. There was no sign of forced entry, as it was noted that the Johnsons didn't lock the doors, a fact that only those close to the family would know. The house hadn't been ransacked as one would expect from a possible robbery gone wrong. Officers at the scene questioned Sarah as to what she remembered before she ran to her neighbor's house for help. She explained to investigators that she'd been asleep when she heard a gunshot. She ran to her parents' bedroom and called out for her mother, and that was when she heard a second gunshot. Without hesitation, Sarah ran to her neighbor's house for help. She didn't see the intruder. The statement was corroborated by the neighbor who called 911, Kim Richards. On the property was a guest house which had been rented out to a close friend of Alan's, 45-year-old Mel Spiegel. Investigators entered the house and found a rather incriminating piece of evidence on the bed, the scope belonging to the same rifle found at the crime scene. However, Mel was nowhere to be found. His convenient disappearance had made him a possible person of interest for investigators. The entire property was sealed off on the orders of lead investigator Sergeant Walt Femling. He also told officers to stop the waste disposal truck from removing any trash cans from the property. The theory was that Mel may have had an altercation with Alan and Diane and killed them in the heat of the moment. As they worked through this theory, Renchick's team searched through the trash cans and discovered even more evidence. Inside, they found a pink bathrobe that had been bundled up. Once crime scene technicians opened the bathrobe, they found a latex glove, single brown leather glove that matched the one found in the Johnsons' bedroom, and ammunition for a .25 caliber gun. All the evidence was tied and sent off for DNA testing while investigators developed their own scenario. It was now becoming clear to investigators that whomever killed the couple knew about the unlocked doors and the day the trash was removed. It was possible the killer threw the evidence in the trash before fleeing the scene. It was time to call in Mel Spiegel. Hours after the double homicide, sheriff's deputies received news that Mel Spiegel had been found in Boise, Idaho. Mel agreed to speak with investigators and met them at the police station in Boise. Investigators asked Mel about his whereabouts that morning. Mel said he spent the weekend with his family and was planning to return to Bellevue in a week. Investigators contacted Mel's family members, who confirmed his alibi. Mel was asked about his relationship with Alan and Diane. He told officers that he'd been renting the guest house from the couple for years, and he showed a very good and close relationship with them. When asked about the rifle used in the murders, admitted that it did belong to him. However, he said it had been locked away in his closet before he left for Boise over the weekend. Investigators then asked Mel about anyone he believed that may have made enemies with the couple. Mel revealed that Alan and Diane were starting to grow worried about their daughter, Sarah. She'd started dating and thanking the old boy named Bruno Santos. From what Mel had heard, Bruno was living in the country illegally and selling drugs to make a living. It was a bit of a stretch for investigators, but now urged them to speak to other family members. Investigators did just that and started to put together a picture of the Johnson family. Alan and Diane met in the early 1980s. Diane had been in a relationship before meeting Alan and had a toddler son named Matt. The pair married in 1983, and Alan adopted Matt as his own son. They moved into a beautiful home in the quiet city of Bellevue, Idaho, and in making 87, welcomed their daughter Sarah Marie Johnson into the world on January 25, 1987. Alan was the co-owner of a landscaping firm in Bellevue, and Diane worked as a tax collector. Together, they made a beautiful home for their 2 children and were, by all accounts, a loving family. The couple were also well known in their community, as Alan was an avid trap shooter, common pastime for many in the community. In 2003, their family life had seemed harmonious to outsiders. Matt, who was 22 years old at the time, was away studying at the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. Sarah had also been doing well at school and was part of her school's volleyball team. She was also the apple of Alan's eye. But investigators were about to uncover the family tensions that had started arising in the previous few months. Having cleared mail was a possible suspect. Investigators now took his advice and returned to Bellevue to speak with family members. As expected, everyone knew the Johnsons to be a happy and loving family. Investigators interviewed their son, Matt, who had returned from the university, as well as Diane's sister and brother-in-law, Linda and Jim Faveld. All 3 said that the family life appeared to be happy and normal. That was until Sarah met Bruno Santos. Matt, Linda, and Jim all agreed that Sarah dating Bruno had become a major point of contention in the family. Over the few months leading up to the murder, tensions had gotten worse within the household. But being a teenager, Sarah naturally rebelled against her parents. Even when her parents forbid Sarah from seeing Bruno again, she continued to defy them. However, Jim revealed information to the investigators that could possibly have given Bruno a reason to murder Diane and Alan. Days before the murders, Alan and Diane had discovered that Sarah had been lying about spending the night at a female friend's house. Sarah had spent the night with Bruno instead. Alan called Jim and told him what happened. Alan then asked Jim to come with him to confront Bruno. Jim told investigators that Alan was furious and threatened to report Bruno to police for assaulting Sarah as she was underage. The 2 men then left with Sarah. A charge of such a serious nature could spell deportation for Bruno. After listening to what Jim had revealed, investigators believed that this was motive enough for Bruno to eliminate the Johnsons. It was time to speak to Bruno Santos. County police were familiar with Bruno Santos. He was a high school dropout and had been involved in a few minor drug-related crimes. When he was taken in for questioning, he became confrontational with investigators. During his interview, he was arrogant and hard to deal with, according to investigators. He then told investigators that he proposed to Sarah and that she'd accepted. Investigators believe that he'd said this to prove that he loved Sarah and wouldn't have done anything to jeopardize their relationship. When investigators asked him about his whereabouts on the morning of the murders, Bruno said that he was asleep on the couch at his home. He told officers to contact his mother, who confirmed that she'd been at home with him. For investigators, this was still not a strong alibi. When investigators asked Bruno about Alwyn and Diane, his attitude towards the Johnsons was obvious. He wasn't a fan of the couple. Back at the Johnsons' house, forensic teams were collecting evidence from the entire home. They'd used a UV light to comb through every part of the house for possible blood evidence that could indicate an escape route taken by the killer. While searching Seiwei's room, they found blood splatter and bone fragments on a wall in Sarah's room. This discovery only added to the mystery of the shooting. The blood and bone were sent to the lab for testing. This discovery had investigators questioning if Sarah was being honest about what she really saw that morning. The search of the room led investigators to even more evidence. A single brown leather glove, the same one that was found bundled up in the trash. A key to the guest house and unspent .264 caliber shells were also found in Sarah's room. On one of the unspent shelves was tissue matter possibly transferred from the glove when the killer tried to hide evidence. This too was sent to forensics for testing. Investigators now believe that Bruno may have killed Sarah's parents and went to her to help him get rid of the evidence. Investigators served Bruno and his mother with a search warrant to collect evidence from the house. All the clothes he worn that day, including his shoes, were taken in for testing. His fingerprints were also taken to test against any found at the crime scene. Bruno was taken to the hospital where a DNA sample was taken for testing. Hair clippings and hand scrapings were also collected for evidence. Bruno was announced as the prime suspect in the murders of Alan and Diane Johnson. However, investigators were about to receive information that was going to take the investigation in a completely unexpected direction. Having thoroughly tested the clothes and shoes taken from Bruno, forensic experts couldn't find any trace of blood belonging to either Diane or Alan. At the actual crime scene, there were no traces of DNA, hairs, or fingerprints found anywhere near the bodies of Alan or Diane, nor was there any physical evidence that placed Bruno in the couple's room. The tests done on the gloves and bathrobe also came back with a negative result. Investigators were stumped. They were sure that Bruno had the most reason to kill both Alan and Diane. However, the complete lack of physical evidence that should have placed Bruno at the scene suggested he was telling them the truth. Bruno was eventually eliminated as a suspect in the case. As they looked at the case closely, their minds started to shift to someone else. Investigators began questioning Sarah's family and friends more intentionally about her home and personal life. They come to discover that Sarah had been prescribed antidepressants and that her relationship with her parents was rocky at best. Family members said that they brushed off her behaviors being normal for a teenager. Sarah, they believed, was at the age when most children start to become rebellious and push against their parents, but Linda, Sarah's aunt, started to grow suspicious with her niece's behavior. She told investigators that Sarah was not going through the normal grieving process. Linda said that Sarah showed more interest in returning to school and her friends than taking in to deal with the loss of both of her parents. Investigators then turned to some of Sarah's friends and asked them about her behavior since the death of her parents. They all agreed that Sarah was acting indifferent to the murders. They also told investigators that she seemed more interested in getting her nails painted. The one thing that stood out for them, though, was Sarah being more concerned for Bruno since his arrest. It was odd to them that Sarah was concerned rather than angry with her parents' alleged killer. Investigators didn't want to believe where their thoughts were taking them, as it was too horrible to imagine. But they had no choice except to look into Sarah as a possible suspect. The Johnsons' home was still an active crime scene, and now investigators were treating Sarah's room as a second area of interest. Investigators of the scene were now questioning how the blood splatter had reached that far. A Dunn expert was called to the house to take a closer look at the spatter pattern. After analyzing the direction from Alan and Diane's room to Sarah's, the gun expert concluded that both bedroom doors were open at the time of the shooting. Investigators had also called plumbers to the scene after clogging was reported in one of the bathroom toilets. The source of the clog appeared to be a shower cap. Investigators decided to interview Linda, Matt, and Mel Spiegel regarding some of the evidence they discovered. Matt and Linda both identified the pink bathrobe as belonging to Sarah. Mill confirmed that Sarah had a key to the guest house and often helped him clean up the place. He also told investigators that Sarah was aware of the gun that was kept in the closet. Investigators now needed to be able to link Sarah to all the evidence. But that was going to prove difficult, as eyewitnesses on the morning of the murders said that Sarah didn't have any traces of blood on her when she ran to a neighbor's house begging for help. This was also confirmed by forensics experts who used a luminol to test for any blood splatter on Sarah's clothes and found nothing at all. Investigators issued a warrant to confiscate and test the clothes Sarah had been wearing in the morning. Meanwhile, investigators wanted to speak to Sarah again and see if her story had changed since they'd last spoke to her. Investigators once again called Sarah in for an interview. She'd been staying with her aunt and uncle. Small inconsistencies were noted in Sarah's story. Overall, investigators found that her story had changed at least 5 different times. In some explanations, she said she was asleep and woke up to the sound of a gunshot. In another, she said she'd been awake when she heard the first gunshot. Another time, she told investigators that she was still in her room when she heard the second gunshot, but once again changed her story and said she was outside her parents' bedroom when the second shot was fired. Sarah also had a hard time to remember if her parents' room door was open or closed at the time of the shooting. Investigators remained calm when questioning Sarah to avoid her picking up on their suspicions. They'd already been made aware that both bedroom doors were open, and that was the only explanation for the blood splatter on Sarah's bedroom wall. Sarah was asked to submit a DNA sample, hair samples, and hand scrapings as part of the investigation was yet to come. Lab results had also confirmed that Sarah's DNA was found on the inner lining of the latex glove and gun residue on both pairs of the brown leather glove. The blood found on the gloves and robe belonged to both Alan and Diane. This was more than enough for investigators to arrest and charge Sarah with the double homicide of Alan and Diane Johnson. On October 29, 2003, Sarah Johnson was arrested for the murders of her parents, Helen and Diane Johnson. She was held without bail at the Blaine County Jail awaiting trial. The story of a teenage girl murdering her parents made headlines nationally and became a media sensation. Investigators and prosecutors had to develop a plausible argument that showed Sarah was motivated and capable of committing such a heinous crime. Relying on statements from family members and friends of both Sarah and her parents, they started to put together a twisted tale of a teenager in the throes of passion. Since Sarah had started dating Bruno, her parents had disapproved of the relationship. As a result, Sarah started to sneak around behind her parents' backs and acted out as any normal teenager would. However, the trigger for Sarah happened a few days before the murders. She'd lied to her parents about staying with a friend when, in fact, she was staying with Bruno. Her father's threats to have Bruno charged with assault and deported to Mexico pushed Sarah over the edge. Investigators and prosecutors believed that this was the moment Sarah had concocted the plan to get rid of her parents and live a happy life with Bruno. Being a fan of true crime and murder mysteries, Sarah believed that she had the perfect plot in place. On the morning of the murders, she got up and went to the guest house to retrieve the rifle. She then put on latex gloves, leather gloves, a shower cap to avoid blood splatter on her hair, and her bathrobe backwards to avoid any blood touching her clothes. Sarah then went to her parents' room when she heard her father get into the shower. She shot Diane in the head while she slept. Sarah then heard her father, Alan, call out and open the bathroom door and shot him in the chest. After committing the murders, she placed knives in the bedrooms to stage the scene as if an intruder killed her pants. She then bundled up the evidence and threw it away in the trash, knowing the waste disposal company would pick up the evidence before investigators could find it. However, that didn't go to plan. Added to that, she didn't take into account the evidence that would be found in her room and the shower cap that had gotten lodged in the plumbing system. The evidence against Sarah was glaring, and it was time to go to trial. In February 2005, 2 years after her parents' murders, her defense team argued that Sarah was innocent and that her parents were murdered by an intruder. The prosecution were ready with their argument. They presented the court with the physical evidence found at the crime scene and testimonies from family and friends that showed Sarah's behavior was strange since her parents were both killed. Most damning of all was the testimony of Bruno Santos, who not only wanted to clear himself of the murder at the trial, but provided the jury with evidence of Sarah's state of mind before the murders. Bruno testified that he and Sarah had agreed to get married, and Sarah had even told them that they could live in a big beautiful house and be happy with just each other. Bruno also told the court that Sarah always spoke about how much she hated her dad and talked about shooting him. After 5 weeks of testimonies, proof of evidence, and crime scene explanations, the jury had come to a decision on March 16, 2005. Sarah, aged 18, was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole to the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Sarah has since made several appeals to have her life sentence reduced. However, all her appeals have been denied, and she still remains in custody. Following Sarah's sentencing, the remaining family members have spoken out publicly about their feelings towards Sarah and her actions. The deaths of Alan and Diane have devastated their family entirely. The majority feel that Sarah was at fault and deserve the punishment she received. Sarah's brother, Matt, believed that Sarah showed no remorse for murdering their parents. He said that if she were ever given a second chance, she'd do a better job with the murders to avoid being caught. Pet Dishman, Diane's mother, spoke to Sarah during her sentencing hearing. She told her granddaughter that they still loved her, but that her actions had devastated their entire family. Owen's sister, Lynn Morell, said that Sarah was spoiled and rotten, and was capable of murdering another person if she was ever released. She asked the judge to consider never releasing her from prison. Today's case was one of a truly twisted and disturbing nature. To be capable of murdering one's own parents proved that Sarah Johnson only thought about herself and not of the devastation she caused for her brother and family. While they're left behind to pick up the pieces, Sarah remains behind bars for her senseless crime. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.